Sometimes the most beautiful transformations happen in the darkest places. When 14-year-old Maya Williams lost everything, including her family, she found herself sleeping on Philadelphia's unforgiving streets with only her German shepherd, King, by her side. Wandering through an abandoned rail yard, she discovered something that would change her life forever. A rusted, forgotten train car, hidden beneath years of ivy and neglect. Most people would see nothing but decay and hopelessness. Maya saw possibility. Using nothing but street scraps, determination, and an unbreakable bond with her four-legged companion, she began turning that metal shell into something extraordinary. What happened next would capture the heart of an entire city and prove that home isn't about where you come from, it's about what you're willing to build. But could one girl's incredible transformation really inspire a movement that would change how Philadelphia treats its most forgotten citizens? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across North Philadelphia's forgotten streets as Maya Williams adjusted the worn strap of her backpack and glanced down at King, her German shepherd companion. His dark eyes met hers with the kind of understanding that comes from shared hardship, and she reached down to touch the weathered military dog tags that hung from his collar, the only physical connection she had left to her father. Staff Sergeant David Williams had been gone for 2 years now, killed alongside Maya's mother in a drunk driving accident that had turned her world upside down. The tags bore his name, service number, and blood type, but to Maya they represented something far more precious. Proof that she came from people who fought for what they believed in, who didn't give up when things got tough. Maya had learned about survival the hard way. After her parents' death, she'd been shuffled through 3 different foster homes in 18 months. The first family had good intentions, but 5 kids already, and Maya felt like an afterthought. The second home was worse, a couple who saw foster children as monthly checks rather than human beings needing love and stability. The third placement had lasted only 2 weeks before Maya made the decision that would define the next chapter of her life. She'd overheard her foster parents discussing whether King was worth the trouble. They'd complained about the food costs, the space he took up, and the way he growled protectively whenever raised voices filled the house. That night, Maya had packed her few belongings, clipped King's leash to his collar, and walked out the front door. She'd rather face the streets with her father's dog than live anywhere that didn't understand that King wasn't just a pet, he was family. 6 months on Philadelphia's streets had taught Maya lessons no 14-year-old should have to learn. She'd discovered which dumpsters behind restaurants had the freshest discarded food, which public restrooms stayed unlocked after hours, and which park benches offered the best combination of shelter and safety. She'd learned to move quietly in the pre-dawn hours when the city belonged to people like her, the invisible ones who lived in the spaces between everyone else's normal lives. King had been her constant protector, his military training evident in the way he positioned himself between Maya and potential threats. He never begged from strangers or caused disturbances that might draw unwanted attention. Her father had trained him well, and that training had become Maya's lifeline. People were less likely to bother a young girl with a large, alert German shepherd at her side. The neighborhood they'd been drifting through that particular morning was industrial North Philadelphia, a landscape of abandoned warehouses, empty lots reclaimed by weeds, and the ghostly remains of a city that had once thrived. Maya preferred these areas to the more populated parts of town. Here she and King could move without dodging social workers, truant officers, or well-meaning citizens who might call the authorities for her own good. They'd been walking along the rusty remnants of old railroad tracks when King suddenly stopped. His ears perked forward with interest. Maya followed his gaze and saw it, a gap in a chain-link fence that had been there so long that ivy and morning glory vines had woven themselves through the metal links, creating a natural curtain. Beyond the fence, she could make out the hulking shapes of old train cars, abandoned and slowly being reclaimed by nature. Maya had always been drawn to forgotten places. There was something peaceful about spaces that the world had moved on from, places where she didn't have to worry about fitting in or explaining herself. She squeezed through the gap in the fence, holding it open for King to follow, and found herself in what had once been a working rail yard. The place had the quiet stillness of a cathedral. Weeds grew tall between the tracks, and wildflowers had pushed through cracks in the concrete. Several old freight cars sat on sidings, their paint faded and streaked with rust, but still solid and imposing. Maya walked among them slowly, King at her side, taking in the way morning light filtered through the canopy of volunteer trees that had grown up around the abandoned cars. It was King who led her to the one that would change everything. He stopped in front of a particularly weathered boxcar, its original blue paint now a patchwork of rust and fading color. Vines had grown up and over its sides, and a small tree had even managed to take root on its roof. To most people, it would have looked like nothing more than a piece of industrial waste slowly returning to the earth. But Maya saw something else entirely. She saw the way morning light streamed through gaps where doors didn't quite close anymore. She noticed the car still sat level on good wheels, and the roof, despite the tree growing from it, appeared structurally sound. She climbed up onto the loading platform and peered through the partially open door. Inside, the car was empty except for years of accumulated leaves and debris. But the space was larger than any bedroom she'd had since her parents died. The floor was solid metal, the walls intact. With some cleaning and basic repairs, it could be more than shelter. It could be a home. Maya spent the rest of that day exploring the rail yard, mapping its layout and assessing its security. The place was clearly abandoned, with no signs of recent human activity except for some old graffiti and empty bottles. A padlocked gate at the main entrance bore a faded sign from a defunct railroad company, but the chain-link fence had enough gaps and weaknesses that someone determined could easily come and go. As the sun began to set, Maya made her decision. She'd been looking for a place where she and King could exist without constantly watching over their shoulders, somewhere she could create stability rather than just survive day to day. The train car wasn't just shelter, it was possibility. That night, as she and King settled into their usual sleeping arrangement in a doorway 3 blocks away, Maya pulled out a water-stained photograph from her jacket pocket. It showed her family from her 13th birthday, her father in his military uniform, her mother laughing at something Maya had said, and Maya herself blowing out candles on a homemade cake. King was in the picture too, younger and sleeker, but with the same intelligent eyes. The photograph was one of the few things she'd managed to grab before leaving her last foster home, and she looked at it every night before sleep. It reminded her of who she'd been when she belonged somewhere, when she was someone's daughter rather than just another homeless kid. But looking at the picture that night, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just for survival, but for the possibility of creating something meaningful. Her father had always said that home wasn't a place you found. It was something you built. Tomorrow, she would start building. King sensed her change in mood and moved closer, resting his large head against her shoulder. His collar tags clinked softly against the concrete, a metallic lullaby that carried the memory of a soldier's promise to always come home. David Williams had kept that promise in the only way he could, through the loyal companion who now shared his daughter's exile and would help her find her way back to something worth calling home. As Maya drifted off to sleep that night, she was already planning. She'd need tools, materials, and above all, she'd need to be smart about how she approached this transformation. But for the first time since her parents' death, she had a vision that extended beyond just making it through another day. She had a project, a purpose, and a partner who would see it through with her. The train car was waiting for them, patient and solid beneath its coat of rust and neglect, ready to become whatever Maya had the courage to make it. Maya returned to The rail yard the next morning with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. In her backpack, alongside her few possessions, she carried a composition notebook she'd found in a dumpster behind a school supply store. Its cover was water-stained, and the first few pages were torn, but it had become her most treasured possession, a place where she could plan, dream, and maintain some connection to the organized life she'd once known. King trotted beside her as they squeezed through the familiar gap in the fence, his tail wagging slightly as he recognized their destination. Maya had noticed that her dog seemed calmer here than anywhere else they'd been. Perhaps it was the quiet, or maybe he sensed her newfound determination. But King appeared to approve of her choice. Standing before the train car in the clear light of morning, Maya began her systematic assessment. She pulled the notebook from her backpack and opened to a fresh page, sketching the basic outline of the car's exterior and making notes about what she observed. The doors, while difficult to move, were still functional. The roof had some small holes where rust had eaten through the metal, but nothing that couldn't be patched. Most importantly, the undercarriage appeared solid, and the car sat level on the tracks. She spent the morning taking measurements, using her own height as a reference point, and documenting every detail in her notebook. The car was approximately 40 feet long and 8 feet wide, larger than most studio apartments she'd seen. The ceiling height was just over 8 feet, plenty of room to stand comfortably. She sketched the interior layout, marking areas for sleeping, storage, and basic living functions. Maya had always been good at visualizing how spaces could be improved. Even as a young child, she'd rearranged her bedroom furniture constantly, always trying to make the most efficient use of available space. Her father had called it tactical thinking, comparing it to the way military personnel had to adapt to new environments quickly and effectively. That first night in the train car was both terrifying and exhilarating. Maya had swept out the worst of the debris using a broken tree branch and laid out the sleeping bags she and King used each night. As darkness settled around them, every sound seemed amplified. The settling of metal, the whisper of wind through the gaps in the walls, the distant hum of the city beyond the rail yard's boundaries. King positioned himself near the door, alert but not anxious. His presence gave Maya the courage she needed to embrace this transition from wandering to dwelling. She opened her notebook. By the light of a small LED flashlight she'd found weeks earlier, and began writing, not just plans for renovation, but letters to her parents. "Dear Mom and Dad," she wrote in careful cursive, "I found a place today that could be home. I know you'd probably be scared having me live in an old train car, but I think Dad would understand. It's like establishing a forward operating base. Except instead of fighting enemies, I'm fighting to build something good." The act of writing to them helped calm her nerves and clarify her thinking. She continued, "King is taking care of me, just like you asked him to. His collar still jingles, sometimes when he walks, and it sounds like you're still here with us. I'm going to make this place something you'd be proud of. I'm going to prove that what you taught me about not giving up actually works." Over the following days, Maya developed a routine that balanced survival with transformation. Mornings were for scavenging, searching dumpsters, construction sites, and abandoned buildings for materials and tools that others had discarded. She found that Thursday mornings were particularly productive, because that's when many businesses threw out items they'd accumulated during the week. Her first major discovery was a heavy-duty extension cord that had been cut short, but still had 20 feet of usable length. She tested it carefully, using the electrical outlet behind a convenience store, and found it still carried power. This meant she could potentially bring electricity into the train car, at least temporarily. Maya documented every find in her notebook, creating an inventory system that would have impressed her father. She drew detailed diagrams of items, noted where she'd found them, and brainstormed multiple uses for each piece. A discarded tarpaulin could become roofing material or interior wall covering. Broken concrete blocks could be stacked to create furniture or storage platforms. The transformation began with basic habitability. Maya spent a full day clearing out all the organic debris from inside the car, understanding instinctively that she needed to eliminate anything that might attract rodents or insects. She used the hose from a nearby loading dock to wash down the interior walls and floor, scrubbing away years of accumulated grime and revealing the underlying structural soundness of the car. Her first real modification was creating a more secure entrance. The original sliding door was difficult to move and impossible to lock from the inside. Using rope and a pulley system improvised from materials she'd scavenged, Maya rigged a way to secure the door that would be invisible from the outside but gave her complete control from within. Security was always on her mind. During her months on the street, Maya had learned that the key to staying safe was remaining invisible while maintaining complete awareness of her surroundings. The train car's location was perfect for both requirements, hidden from casual view but offering excellent sightlines to anyone approaching. After her first week of living in the car, Maya received an unexpected visit. She was outside, organizing salvaged materials, when an older black man in a security uniform approached from the direction of the main gate. King immediately moved between Maya and the newcomer, alert but not aggressive. "Easy there, young lady," the man said, raising his hands peacefully. "Name's Walter. I work security for the industrial park next door." He gestured toward a cluster of warehouses visible beyond the fence. "Been watching you come and go for a few days now. Just wanted to make sure you're not planning any trouble." Maya felt her heart racing, but she forced herself to stay calm. "We're not causing any problems, just passing through." Walter studied her for a long moment, taking in her organized pile of materials and the obviously cleaned area around the train car. "Passing through, huh? Looks more like you're settling in." His tone wasn't hostile, more curious than accusatory. "The property's abandoned," Maya said carefully. "We're not hurting anything." "No, I suppose you're not." Walter glanced at King, who had relaxed slightly but remained watchful. "That's a good-looking dog you've got there. Military trained?" "My father was Army," Maya said, surprised by her willingness to share this information with a stranger. Walter nodded slowly. "I was Navy myself, 20 years. I can always tell a military dog. They've got that bearing, you know." He paused, seeming to make some internal decision. "Listen, I don't know what your situation is, and it's not my business to ask. But this rail yard belongs to the city now, and eventually they're going to remember it exists. When that happens, you'll want to be somewhere else." "How long do you think we have?" Maya asked, surprising herself again with her directness. "Could be months, could be years. City moves slow on properties like this. But you seem like a smart kid, and I'd hate to see you get caught off guard." Walter reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a business card. "That's got my cell number. If you ever need anything, or if you see anyone else causing real trouble around here, you give me a call." After Walter left, Maya sat in her train car and opened her notebook to a fresh page. She wrote "timeline" at the top and began planning more aggressively. If she had limited time to make this transformation work, she needed to be more systematic, more ambitious. That night, she wrote another letter to her parents. "I think I understand now what you meant about taking calculated risks. This train car could be temporary, but what I'm learning here about building something from nothing, about problem solving, about not being afraid to work hard, that's permanent. That's what I'll carry with me wherever I go next." Maya closed the notebook and looked around her metal sanctuary. In just over a week, she'd transformed it from a debris-filled shell into the beginning of a home. Hing lay stretched out on a piece of carpet she'd found and cleaned, more relaxed than she'd seen him since before her parents died. For the first time since that terrible night, when she'd walked away from her last foster placement, Maya felt like she was moving towards something rather than just away from everything else. The train car wasn't just shelter anymore. It was her first real project, her proof that she could create something meaningful with her own hands and determination. She had no way of knowing that this decision to claim a forgotten piece of the city as her own would eventually change not just her life, but the lives of countless others who had also been overlooked and underestimated. All she knew was that tomorrow she would continue building. 3 weeks into her residency in the train car, Maya made the discovery that would change everything about her living situation. She'd been exploring a different section of the abandoned rail yard when she spotted something glinting in the morning sun from beneath a pile of discarded electronic equipment. Brushing away leaves and debris, she uncovered a solar panel, its surface cracked but still largely intact. Maya had seen similar panels on some of the newer houses in better neighborhoods, and she understood the basic concept: sunlight converted to electricity. What she didn't know was whether this damaged panel could still function, but she carefully extracted it from the pile and carried it back to her train car for closer inspection. The panel was smaller than she'd expected, about 2 feet by 3 feet, but it felt substantial in her hands. The aluminum frame was dented, and the glass surface had a spider web of cracks across one corner, but the majority of the photovoltaic cells appeared undamaged. Maya spent the afternoon researching solar power using the free internet at the public library, taking careful notes about voltage, amperage, and battery storage. That evening, she wrote in her notebook, "If I can make this solar panel work, everything changes. Real electricity means lights after dark, maybe even a small refrigerator. Eventually, it means I could have a workshop area, tools that need power, even charge a phone if I ever get one." The technical challenge energized Maya in a way she hadn't expected. For the first time since her parents' death, she had a complex problem that required sustained learning and experimentation. Her father had always encouraged her curiosity about how things worked, and she found herself remembering conversations they'd had about electrical systems and renewable energy. Using money she'd earned returning recyclable bottles and cans, Maya purchased a basic electrical testing kit from a hardware store. The elderly clerk, suspicious of a teenager buying electrical equipment, questioned her extensively about her intentions before finally accepting her explanation that she was working on a school science project. Back at the train car, Maya carefully tested each section of the solar panel. To her amazement, most of it was still functional. The cracked corner produced no power, but the remaining sections generated enough electricity to light a small LED bulb when positioned in direct sunlight. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Installing the panel required more engineering than Maya had anticipated. She needed to create a mounting system that would position it optimally for sun exposure while keeping it secure from wind and weather. Using angle irons scavenged from a construction dumpster and bolts purchased with her bottle return money, she fabricated a mounting bracket that could be adjusted seasonally as the sun's angle changed. The work was physically demanding and technically challenging. Maya had to drill mounting holes through the train car's roof, seal them properly to prevent leaks, and run wiring down through a small access hole into the car's interior. Each step required careful planning and multiple attempts to get right. King seemed to understand the importance of Maya's project and appointed himself as both assistant and security guard. He would retrieve drop tools, alert her to approaching visitors, and provide companionship during the long hours of meticulous work. His presence made the solitary labor feel less lonely and more like a shared enterprise. Maya's first successful evening with electric light was magical. The LED bulb cast a warm glow throughout the train car, transforming it from a makeshift shelter into something that felt genuinely livable. She celebrated by writing in her notebook by electric light for the first time since moving into the car. "Dear Mom and Dad," she wrote, "tonight I'm writing this by electricity. I made myself from sunlight. I know that sounds impossible, but it's true. The solar panel was broken when I found it, but most of it still works. Dad always said that most things aren't completely broken, just damaged in ways that can be fixed if you're patient and creative enough." The success with the solar panel gave Maya confidence to tackle more complex projects. She began planning a complete electrical system for the train car, with outlets for tools and appliances, switches for different light zones, and eventually, she hoped, enough power for a small heating unit for the coming winter. Her daily routine evolved to accommodate the technical demands of her electrical work. Mornings were still devoted to scavenging, but now she searched specifically for electrical components, wire, switches, outlets, and anything that might be useful for her growing power system. Afternoons were for installation work, taking advantage of the best light and her peak energy levels. Evenings were for planning, research, and correspondence with her parents through her notebook. Maya also began encountering other homeless individuals who were curious about her project. Word had spread through the informal networks that connected people living on the margins, and she occasionally found visitors examining her solar installation with interest. One evening, an older woman named Dolores approached the train car with her 2 teenage sons. They'd been sleeping in an abandoned warehouse several blocks away, but city demolition crews were scheduled to tear it down within the month. "I heard you got electricity working in that old car," Dolores said, her tone respectful but skeptical. "My boys have been out of school for 2 months because we don't have an address, and they can't do their homework without light." Maya felt a complex mix of emotions. She was proud that her work had gained recognition, but also protective of the sanctuary she'd created. After a moment's hesitation, she invited the family to see what she'd accomplished. Dolores and her sons were genuinely impressed by Maya's electrical system and the overall transformation of the train car. "You did all this yourself?" asked Marcus, the older boy, who appeared to be about 16. "King helped," Maya replied, gesturing toward her dog, who was monitoring the visitors with professional alertness. As the family prepared to leave, Dolores turned back to Maya. "If you ever want to teach my boys some of what you've learned about electrical work, I've got some things that might be useful trade. I used to work as a seamstress before we lost our apartment. I could make curtains, cushions, whatever you need to make this place more comfortable." Maya considered the offer. She'd been thinking about insulation and ways to make the train car warmer as autumn approached. "What kind of materials would you need? Fabric, thread, maybe some stuffing." "Material. Nothing too expensive," Dolores smiled. "And my boys are good workers when they're motivated. They could help with some of your bigger projects." That night, Maya wrote extensively in her notebook about the possibilities of collaboration. She'd been focused on solving her own housing problem, but she was beginning to see that her methods might have broader application. Other people were facing similar challenges, and perhaps some of what she'd learned could be shared. The solar panel had become more than just a source of electricity. It was proof that complex problems could be solved with patience, creativity, and determination. It represented Maya's growing confidence in her ability to not just survive, but to build something meaningful from the pieces the world had discarded. As she settled down for sleep under her self-generated electric light, Maya felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The girl who had fled her last foster home 6 months earlier had been focused entirely on escape and survival. The young woman she was becoming had learned to envision possibilities and make them real. Maya's first major test came with the autumn rains. She'd been living in the train car for nearly 2 months when Philadelphia's weather shifted from the dry heat of late summer to the persistent dampness of fall. The small holes in the roof that had seemed manageable during sunny weather became serious problems when water began dripping steadily onto her carefully organized living space. The leak started as a minor annoyance, a few drops hitting her sleeping area during the first storm. But as the rain continued for 3 consecutive days, Maya realized she was facing a crisis that could undermine everything she'd built. Water pooled on the metal floor, created humidity that fogged her improvised windows and threatened the electrical system she'd worked so hard to install. King seemed as frustrated as Maya by the constant dampness. His thick coat, stayed perpetually damp, and he couldn't find a dry spot to rest comfortably. Maya watched him pacing restlessly around the train car and knew she had to find a solution quickly. Using a combination of tarps, plastic sheeting, and roofing cement she'd found at a construction site, Maya developed a systematic approach to weatherproofing her home. She started by identifying every point where water was entering, marking each location with a piece of chalk. Then, working during brief breaks in the rain, she sealed each hole with roofing cement and covered the entire affected area with overlapping sheets of heavy plastic secured with duct tape and wooden strips. The repair work was miserable, cold, wet and dangerous as Maya balanced on the train car's curved roof while rain made every surface slippery. But by the end of the fourth day, she'd achieved something that felt miraculous, a completely dry interior during the heaviest downpour of the season. That evening, as Maya and King settled into their warm, dry space while rain drummed against the sealed roof, she experienced a profound sense of accomplishment. She'd faced her first major crisis as a homeowner and solved it using nothing but determination and recycled materials. The success with weatherproofing gave Maya confidence to tackle more ambitious projects. She began designing and building functional furniture from salvaged materials. A discarded office desk became the base for a kitchen counter. Concrete blocks and wooden planks created storage shelves that made efficient use of the train car's vertical space. An old reclining chair, minus its broken reclining mechanism, became a comfortable reading seat positioned to take advantage of natural light from her improvised windows. Maya's most meaningful project during this period was creating a sign for her home. She'd found a piece of driftwood behind a riverside restaurant, weathered smooth by water and time. Using a set of wood carving tools discovered in an estate sale dumpster, she carefully carved the word "home" into the wood surface, then stained the letters with tea to make them stand out against the pale wood grain. The sign represented something important to Maya, a declaration that this wasn't just temporary shelter, but a place where she belonged. She mounted it beside the train car's entrance, positioned so it would be visible to anyone approaching, but hidden from casual observers passing by the rail yard. King seemed to approve of the sign's installation. He spent more time resting near the entrance after Maya hung it, as if he too understood that they were no longer just camping in an abandoned train car, but had established a genuine home base. Maya's daily routine had evolved into something that felt surprisingly normal. She woke each morning to natural light, filtering through her carefully positioned windows, checked her solar panel's overnight battery charge, and made breakfast on a camp stove she'd modified to work more efficiently in the confined space. King had his own routine, patrolling the perimeter of their territory before settling in for his morning nap. The approaching winter motivated Maya to focus on insulation. She'd researched the physics of heat retention and understood that her metal train car would be extremely difficult to keep warm without proper insulation. Using materials scavenged from construction sites, foam insulation, reflective barriers, and heavy plastic sheeting, she began creating an inner shell within the train car that would trap and hold heated air. The insulation project required Maya to essentially rebuild the train car's interior. She framed out walls using wooden strips, filled the gaps with foam insulation, and covered everything with plastic sheeting that could be decorated later. The work reduced her living space by several inches on all sides, but the improvement in temperature control was immediate and dramatic. During this period, Maya also began developing relationships with some of the other homeless individuals who frequented the rail yard area. Dolores and her sons became regular visitors, with Marcus and his younger brother James helping Maya with larger construction projects in exchange for electrical work tutorials. Maya discovered that teaching others reinforced her own understanding of the technical skills she'd developed. When she explained to Marcus how the solar panel system worked, she found herself thinking more clearly about potential improvements and upgrades. When she showed James how to safely install electrical outlets, she gained new appreciation for how much she'd learned in just a few months. These collaborative work sessions also provided Maya with social interaction she hadn't realized she was missing. The months of solitary work had been necessary for establishing her basic living situation, but she found genuine enjoyment in sharing her knowledge and learning from others' experiences. Dolores proved particularly valuable as a partner. Her sewing skills enabled Maya to create proper curtains for privacy and light control, cushions that made her salvaged furniture comfortable, and even a warm jacket for King from an old sleeping bag that was too damaged to use for its original purpose. As autumn progressed toward winter, Maya's train car had been transformed into something that visitors consistently described as cozy and surprisingly comfortable. The space was warm, dry, well lit, and efficiently organized. More importantly, it felt genuinely lived in rather than improvised. Maya marked the 3-month anniversary of her arrival in the rail yard by updating her notebook with a complete inventory of what she'd accomplished. The list filled 4 pages and included everything from major systems like electrical and heating to small details like the wooden hooks she'd carved for hanging clothes and tools. But the entry she was most proud of was simpler. Today, King and I have been home for 3 months. This isn't just a place where we sleep anymore. It's a place where we belong, where we've built something meaningful, where we're not just surviving, but actually living. That night, as Maya settled into sleep in her warm, dry, electrically lit home, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The scared 14-year-old who had first discovered this rusted train car had been focused entirely on basic survival. The young woman she'd become was beginning to envision possibilities that extended far beyond her own immediate needs. Maya's expansion beyond the rail yard began out of necessity, while her electrical system provided lighting and power for small tools. She needed better materials for the plumbing project she'd been planning. The train car's waste management system consisted of a portable camping toilet and water storage containers that had to be emptied and refilled regularly, a process that was becoming increasingly difficult as winter approached. Her search for plumbing supplies led her through neighborhoods she'd avoided during her early weeks on the streets. These areas were more populated, with greater risk of encountering police or social workers, but they also offered access to hardware stores, supply warehouses, and construction sites where she might find the materials she needed. It was during one of these foraging expeditions that Maya first encountered Mrs. Chen. The elderly Chinese-American woman was tending a small community garden wedged between 2 abandoned lots, carefully harvesting late-season vegetables despite the crisp October morning. Maya had been drawn to investigate because she'd noticed the garden's neat rows and healthy plants from several blocks away, a striking contrast to the urban decay surrounding it. "You're interested in gardening?" Mrs. Chen asked in accented but clear English, noticing Maya's careful observation of her cultivation techniques. Maya hesitated, unsure whether to engage with this stranger. But there was something non-threatening about the older woman's manner, and Maya found herself curious about how anyone managed to grow food successfully in such an unlikely urban location. "I've never tried growing anything," Maya admitted, "but I've been thinking it might be useful to learn." Mrs. Chen straightened slowly, studying Maya with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in far more than just her appearance. "Growing food is always useful, especially for young people who need to be self-sufficient. You live around here?" "Not far," Maya replied carefully, not wanting to reveal the specifics of her living situation. What followed was Maya's first real conversation with an adult since her encounter with Walter the security guard months earlier. Mrs. Chen had been maintaining the community garden for 15 years, transforming what had been a drug-dealing corner into a productive space that supplied fresh vegetables to several dozen neighborhood families. "The city tried to shut me down 3 times," Mrs. Chen explained, as she showed Maya around the garden. They said I didn't have permits, that the land wasn't zoned for agriculture, but the neighbors supported me, and eventually the city council decided it was easier to make it legal than to keep fighting. Maya was fascinated by Mrs. Chen's approach to problem-solving. Like Maya's own work on the train car, the garden represented someone taking initiative to improve their circumstances rather than waiting for external solutions. But unlike Maya's solitary efforts, this project had evolved to benefit an entire community. Winter will be here soon, Mrs. Chen observed, harvesting the last of her tomatoes. But there are vegetables that grow well in cold weather if you know how to protect them. Kale, spinach, turnips, hardy plants that can feed a family when other food is expensive. She reached into a canvas bag and pulled out several small envelopes, each hand-labeled in careful script. These are seeds I saved from this year's best plants. Take some. If you have any place to grow them, even a small sunny spot, you can have fresh vegetables through the winter. Maya accepted the seed packets with surprise and gratitude. She'd been focused so intently on the mechanical and electrical aspects of making the train car livable that she'd barely considered the possibility of growing food. But looking at Mrs. Chen's thriving garden, she began to envision possibilities. "Thank you," Maya said, studying the packets. "I'm not sure I have the right kind of space, but I'd like to try. Good soil and sunlight. That's all plants really need, along with someone who pays attention to what they're telling you," Mrs. Chen replied. "Plants are very honest. When something is wrong, they show you immediately. When things are right, they grow." Over the following days, Maya studied the seed packets and researched container gardening techniques at the library. She learned that many vegetables could be grown successfully in improvised planters, provided they had adequate drainage, appropriate soil, and sufficient light. The area around her train car received good morning sun, and she had access to water from the loading dock hose she'd been using for other projects. Maya's first gardening experiment involved old paint buckets she'd found at a construction site. She drilled drainage holes in the bottoms, filled them with a mixture of topsoil purchased with her bottle return money and compost she'd begun creating from food scraps, and planted Mrs. Chen's seeds according to the instructions she'd copied from gardening websites. King seemed puzzled by Maya's new project, but appointed himself supervisor of the gardening activities. He would sit nearby while she worked, alert for potential threats, but clearly comfortable with their expanded territory around the train car. The first green shoots appeared within a week, tiny but unmistakably alive. Maya checked on them multiple times daily, adjusting their positions to follow the sun and protecting them from wind with improvised shelters made from plastic bottles and wooden stakes. As her small garden began to establish itself, Maya found herself returning to Mrs. Chen's community garden regularly. Sometimes she helped with harvesting or maintenance work. Other times, she simply observed and asked questions about techniques and timing. Mrs. Chen seemed to enjoy having an eager student and shared knowledge generously. "My grandmother in China always said that growing food is the most hopeful thing a person can do," Mrs. Chen told Maya one afternoon as they worked side by side, weeding between rows of winter vegetables. "When you plant a seed, you're betting that the future will be better than today. You're saying you'll be there to harvest what you've planted." These conversations with Mrs. Chen provided Maya with a different perspective on her situation. While she'd been focused on immediate survival and short-term shelter improvements, Mrs. Chen's approach was inherently long-term. The garden required planning seasons in advance, building soil quality year after year, and maintaining faith that consistent care would eventually yield abundance. Maya began applying this longer-term thinking to her train car project. Instead of just solving immediate problems, she started planning for improvements that might take months to complete, but would provide lasting benefits. She researched rainwater collection systems that could reduce her dependence on the loading dock hose, She investigated methods for generating enough solar power to run a small refrigerator, which would transform her ability to store fresh food. Most significantly, she began to envision her train car not as a temporary shelter, but as a permanent home that could continue evolving and improving over time. This shift in perspective affected everything from the materials she chose for projects to the level of craftsmanship she invested in each improvement. Maya's growing friendship with Mrs. Chen also provided something she hadn't fully realized. She was missing intergenerational guidance from an adult who respected her capabilities while offering wisdom gained through decades of experience. Mrs. Chen never questioned Maya's living situation or offered unsolicited advice about what she should be doing differently. Instead, she shared practical knowledge and philosophical insights that helped Maya think more strategically about her choices. As autumn progressed toward winter, Maya's small container garden produced its first harvest: fresh spinach, kale, and turnips that supplemented her diet with vitamins and flavors she hadn't tasted since leaving her last foster home. The vegetables were small but genuinely fresh, and sharing them with King made Maya feel like they were truly living rather than just surviving. The seed packets had become more than just a source of fresh food. They represented the possibility of sustaining herself not just through her own labor, but through partnership with natural systems that could provide abundance when properly tended. Maya carefully saved seeds from her best plants, continuing Mrs. Chen's cycle of renewal and hope. Maya's friendship with Mrs. Chen deepened as November brought the first serious cold weather to Philadelphia. What had begun as casual conversations at the community garden evolved into regular visits that became the highlight of Maya's week. Mrs. Chen lived in a small apartment above a corner store 2 blocks from the garden, and she'd begun inviting Maya to join her for afternoon tea and cooking lessons. The invitation came on a particularly grey Thursday when Maya had been helping Mrs. Chen prepare the garden for winter, covering sensitive plants with protective cloths and mulching the soil to prevent freezing. "You work hard, and you're always hungry when you finish," Mrs. Chen observed with the directness Maya had come to appreciate. "Come upstairs. I'll teach you to make something that will stick to your ribs when the weather gets cold." Maya hesitated, uncomfortable with the idea of accepting charity, but Mrs. Chen seemed to understand her reluctance. "I'm not offering to feed you," she said with a slight smile. "I'm offering to teach you to feed yourself better. There's a difference." Mrs. Chen's apartment was small but warmly furnished, with cooking aromas that reminded Maya painfully of her childhood home. The kitchen was compact but extraordinarily well organized, with spices arranged in glass jars, cooking utensils hung precisely where they were most useful, and a collection of recipe cards stored in a wooden box that had obviously been well used for many years. "My mother brought this recipe box from China when she immigrated in 1952, Mrs. Chen explained, running her fingers over the smooth wooden surface. "Some of these recipes are hundreds of years old, passed down from grandmother to granddaughter. Others I learned from neighbors when I was a young wife trying to feed a family on very little money." Maya watched, fascinated, as Mrs. Chen selected several cards and began assembling ingredients for what she called stone soup, a hearty stew that could be made from whatever vegetables were available, extended with rice or noodles, and flavored with a carefully balanced combination of spices and aromatics. "The secret," Mrs. Chen explained as she demonstrated her knife technique, "is understanding that cooking is about more than following instructions. It's about paying attention to what you have, what you need, and what will make people feel cared for." Maya had been living on canned food, bread, and whatever she could prepare on her single-burner camp stove. Watching Mrs. Chen transform simple ingredients into something that smelled like home and comfort was revelatory. She took careful notes as Mrs. Chen explained not just what to do, but why each step mattered and how to adjust the recipe based on available ingredients and personal preferences. "You can make this soup in your train car," Mrs. Chen said, apparently having deduced more about Maya's living situation than Maya had explicitly shared. "The pot I'm using isn't fancy, and the technique works just as well on a camp stove as on a regular range." Maya felt a moment of panic. Had she revealed too much about where she was living? But Mrs. Chen's tone remained matter-of-fact and non-judgmental, focused on practical problem-solving rather than personal circumstances. Over the following weeks, these cooking lessons became a regular part of Maya's routine. Mrs. Chen shared recipes that were specifically adapted for limited cooking equipment and storage space. Dishes that could be prepared in a single pot, that used ingredients with long shelf lives, and that provided maximum nutrition for minimal cost. Maya learned to make congee, a rice porridge that could be flavored with vegetables, herbs, or small amounts of meat, and that provided sustaining energy for physical work. She mastered the art of stir-frying, which allowed her to use whatever vegetables were available from her own small garden or Mrs. Chen's larger plots, cooked quickly to preserve nutrients and flavor. Most importantly, Mrs. Chen taught Maya about food storage and preservation. Using techniques that had sustained Chinese families through periods of scarcity, Maya learned to ferment vegetables for winter eating, to dry herbs and preserve their medicinal and culinary properties, and to stretch protein sources by combining them with grains and legumes in nutritionally complete meals. "Food is medicine," Mrs. Chen explained one afternoon, as she showed Maya how to prepare ginger tea for digestive health. "When you understand how different ingredients affect your body and your mood, you can eat in ways that keep you strong even when life is difficult." These lessons had immediate practical benefits for Maya's daily life. Her diet improved dramatically, providing more energy for the physical work required to maintain and improve her train car home. But the cooking skills also gave her a sense of connection to cultural traditions and family knowledge that she'd lost when her parents died. Maya began incorporating Mrs. Chen's recipes into her own meal planning, adapting them further for her specific equipment and storage limitations. She invested some of her carefully hoarded money in better cooking tools, a proper chef's knife, a wok that worked well on her camp stove, and storage containers that would keep ingredients fresh longer. The improvement in Maya's nutrition had a noticeable effect on King as well. Mrs. Chen had taught Maya how to prepare healthy supplemental meals for dogs using human food ingredients, and King's coat became shinier and his energy more consistent as his diet improved alongside Maya's. During one of their cooking sessions, Mrs. Chen made an observation that surprised Maya with its perceptiveness. "You're not just learning to cook," she said, as Maya practiced her knife skills on winter vegetables. "You're learning to take care of yourself in a way that honors your dignity. That's important when the world treats you like you don't matter." Maya paused in her chopping, struck by the accuracy of Mrs. Chen's insight. The months of living on convenience store food and whatever she could scavenge had been about pure survival. Learning to prepare real meals, to eat food that tasted good and nourished her body properly, was indeed about dignity and self-worth. The cooking lessons also introduced Maya to Carlos, Mrs. Chen's 16-year-old neighbor, who sometimes helped with grocery shopping and kitchen tasks in exchange for meals and tutoring with his schoolwork. Carlos was curious about Maya's living situation and impressed by her independence, though Mrs. Chen discouraged him from asking too many direct questions. "Carlos is a good boy, but he talks too much," Mrs. Chen warned Maya privately. "Be careful what you share with him about your circumstances. Not everyone who seems friendly has good judgment about when to keep quiet." Despite this caution, Maya found herself enjoying Carlos's company during the cooking lessons. He was closer to her own age than anyone she'd interacted with regularly since leaving foster care, and his enthusiastic appreciation for Mrs. Chen's teaching made the sessions more social and enjoyable. Carlos was particularly interested in Maya's technical skills with electrical work and construction, and he began asking questions about how he might learn similar capabilities. Maya found that explaining her methods to someone else helped clarify her own understanding and gave her confidence about the knowledge she'd accumulated through months of trial and error learning. As winter settled over Philadelphia, Maya's weekly cooking lessons with Mrs. Chen became an anchor of stability and growth in her life. The recipe box represented more than just meal planning. It was a connection to generations of wisdom about sustaining family and community through challenging circumstances. Maya began copying her favorite recipes into her notebook, alongside her construction plans and letters to her parents. The combination felt natural and complete. Plans for shelter, plans for sustenance, and plans for continuing growth and learning. She was building more than just a place to live. She was building a life worth living. Maya's careful balance between invisibility and community connection collapsed on a cold December morning when she returned from her weekly cooking lesson with Mrs. Chen to find two official vehicles parked at the rail yard's main entrance. A police cruiser and a white sedan with government plates sat behind the previously locked gate, which now stood open with the chain cut and lying on the ground. King immediately sensed Maya's tension and positioned himself protectively beside her as they approached their home from the concealed entrance they'd been using for months. Through the train car's window, Maya could see people inside her carefully constructed sanctuary. Strangers examining her possessions, taking photographs, making notes on official-looking clipboards. Maya Williams? The voice came from behind her. Maya turned to see a middle-aged woman in a business suit approaching from the direction of the government sedan. "I'm Janet Morrison from Child Protective Services. We need to talk." Maya's first instinct was to run, but King's steady presence beside her and the impossibility of escaping notice at this point made her choose to stand her ground. "This is private property," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You can't just come in here." "Actually, that's one of the things we need to discuss," the social worker replied, her tone professionally sympathetic but firm. "You're 14 years old, Maya. You can't live alone, regardless of whose property this is. We're here to help you transition into appropriate housing and get you back in school where you belong." The next 2 hours felt like a nightmare replay of every bad experience Maya had endured with the foster care system. She was questioned about her living arrangements, her health, her education, and her plans for the future. Officials photographed her train car transformation, catalogued her possessions, and documented what they clearly viewed as evidence of a minor living in unsuitable conditions. Maya answered their questions as minimally as possible, cooperating. Enough to avoid escalating the situation, but revealing nothing about Mrs. Chen, Dolores and her sons, or any of the other people who had become part of her support network. She understood instinctively that protecting others was more important than defending herself. The breaking point came when one of the officials suggested that King would need to be turned over to animal control since Maya couldn't provide proper care for a pet in her current circumstances. Maya's careful composure finally cracked. "He's not a pet," she said, her voice rising for the first time during the interrogation. "He was my father's service dog. He's been taking care of me since my parents died, and I'm not giving him up to anybody." The mention of Maya's father seemed to shift something in the dynamic. Janet Morrison paused in her note-taking and looked at Maya with sharper attention. "Your father was military. Staff Sergeant David Williams, Army. He died in a car accident 2 years ago, along with my mother." Maya's voice was steady again, but she could feel tears threatening. "King was his partner for 3 deployments. He's not just a dog, he's a family." One of the police officers, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, stepped forward. "Sergeant Williams, did he serve in Afghanistan? Big guy, about 6'2", always had that German shepherd with him when he was stateside?" Maya nodded, surprised by the recognition. "I knew your dad. the officer continued. Good soldier, good man. We worked together on some community outreach programs before he deployed for the last time. He turned to the social worker. This girl's father was planning to develop this rail yard area into affordable housing when he got back. He'd bought the land through a veterans assistance program, but never had the chance to do anything with it before the accident. The statement hung in the air like an unexpected thunderbolt. Maya stared at the officer, trying to process what he'd said. My father owned this land? Hold on, Janet Morrison interjected, clearly skeptical. That's a pretty significant claim. Do you have any documentation to support that? The officer, Maya could see from his name tag that he was Sergeant Rodriguez, pulled out his phone and made a call. Let me reach out to someone who would know for sure. What followed was a series of phone calls that gradually revealed the truth Maya had never known. Her father had indeed purchased the abandoned rail yard through a Veterans Administration program that provided low-interest loans for redevelopment projects in economically disadvantaged areas. He'd planned to convert it into affordable housing for military families and other low-income residents, but his death had left the project in legal limbo. The property had remained in David Williams's name because the probate process had been incomplete when Maya aged out of the system and disappeared from official view. Technically, as his only heir, Maya was the rightful owner of not just the train car she'd been living in, but the entire 5-acre rail yard and the development rights that came with it. This changes everything, Janet Morrison admitted after a conference with her supervisors and the legal department. We still have concerns about a minor living independently, but if Maya is actually the property owner, the legal situation becomes much more complex. Maya felt overwhelmed by the implications of this revelation. For months, she'd been living as a trespasser on what turned out to be her own land, developing survival skills and construction abilities that aligned perfectly with her father's unrealized vision for the property. I want to see the documents, Maya said, finding her voice again. I want to understand what my father was planning to do here. Sergeant Rodriguez nodded approvingly. That's smart. Your father kept detailed plans for the development. The VA office should have copies of everything. Architectural drawings, financing arrangements, zoning approvals. He'd done most of the groundwork before his final deployment. The immediate crisis of Maya being removed from her home was temporarily resolved, but the situation remained complicated. As a minor, she couldn't simply be left alone to manage a property development project, even if she was the legal owner. However, the fact that she'd already demonstrated remarkable capability in improving the property worked in her favor. Mrs. Chen appeared at the rail yard entrance just as the officials were preparing to leave. She'd apparently been watching from a distance and timed her arrival to coincide with their departure, a strategic decision that Maya recognized as typically thoughtful. Excuse me, Mrs. Chen addressed Janet Morrison politely, but with unmistakable authority. I understand you're concerned about this young lady's welfare. I want you to know that she has community support. We've been watching over her, and she's shown remarkable responsibility and maturity. The social worker seemed surprised by Mrs. Chen's intervention, but listened respectfully as the older woman provided a character reference that painted Maya in a very different light than the stereotype of a runaway teenager living in dangerous conditions. Maya has been helping with our community garden, learning practical skills, and contributing positively to our neighborhood, Mrs. Chen continued. She's not a troublemaker or a victim. She's a young person who found herself in difficult circumstances and responded with intelligence and determination. As the officials finally departed, leaving Maya and King alone in their train car with a stack of legal documents and contact information, Maya felt as if her entire world had shifted. The property she'd claimed through necessity was actually her inheritance. The survival skills she'd developed were directly relevant to the development project her father had envisioned. The community connections she'd been building could become the foundation for something much larger than just her own housing needs. That evening, Maya sat in her train car, reading through her father's development plans by the light of her solar-powered LEDs. The documents revealed a vision remarkably similar to what she'd been unconsciously creating. Affordable housing built from converted train cars, community gardens providing fresh food, shared workshops where residents could learn practical skills and maintain their homes. Maya opened her notebook and began writing, "Dear Mom and Dad, today I learned that I've been living in the place you chose for our future. I've been building the same things you planned to build, without even knowing that was your dream too. I think maybe you've been guiding me all along, helping me become the person who could carry forward what you started." For the first time since her parents' death, Maya felt connected not just to their memory, but to their unfinished work. She had inherited more than property. She had inherited a mission that could transform not just her own circumstances, but the lives of many other people who needed safe, affordable homes and supportive community. The Veterans Administration office in downtown Philadelphia felt intimidating to Maya as she walked through its marble lobby, carrying her backpack and her father's military identification documents. Mrs. Chen had insisted on accompanying her, and King wore his official service dog vest, a designation they'd managed to obtain through a veterans organization that recognized his military training and Maya's status as a veterans dependent. "Remember," Mrs. Chen whispered as they waited for their appointment, "you're not asking for charity. You're claiming what belongs to you and continuing work your father already started. There's a difference, and it matters how you present yourself." Maya nodded, trying to calm her nerves. The past week had been a whirlwind of legal consultations, document gathering, and meetings with social workers who were trying to figure out how to handle her unprecedented situation. The consensus seemed to be that Maya's case required creative solutions that didn't fit standard bureaucratic categories. David Morrison, the VA housing specialist who had worked with Maya's father, was a man in his 50s with the bearing of someone who had served in the military himself. He greeted Maya with respectful sympathy and immediately made space for King to lie beside Maya's chair, a gesture that helped put her at ease. "Your father was one of the most thorough people I ever worked with on a development project," Morrison began, placing a large portfolio on his desk. He understood that creating sustainable, affordable housing required more than just construction. It needed community planning, financial sustainability, and long-term maintenance systems. Maya's breath caught as Morrison opened the portfolio and revealed her father's detailed architectural drawings. The plans showed the rail yard transformed into a residential community centered around converted train cars, exactly as Maya had envisioned during her months of solitary work. But her father's version was far more sophisticated, incorporating elements she hadn't thought to include. The plans included a community center housed in a renovated warehouse, shared workshop spaces equipped with tools and equipment for residents to maintain and improve their homes, and extensive green spaces, including not just individual gardens, but also common areas for recreation and gatherings. Most remarkably, the design incorporated sustainable systems for water collection, waste processing, and energy generation that would make the community largely self-sufficient. He called it Veterans Village, Morrison explained, pointing to the title page. The idea was to create affordable housing specifically designed for military families and other people who understood the value of disciplined community living and mutual support. Maya studied the drawings with growing amazement and recognition. Her father had planned spaces for exactly the kinds of activities she'd been developing organically. Workshops for teaching practical skills, communal cooking areas, even a small clinic where residents could receive basic health care. The design philosophy seemed to be based on the same principles Maya had discovered through necessity: resourcefulness, community cooperation, and the understanding that home was something you built rather than something you found. The financing was all arranged, Morrison continued. Your father had secured federal grants, VA loans, and commitments from several non-profit organizations. The project was ready to begin construction when he deployed for his final tour. After his death, everything went into legal hold pending resolution of his estate. Maya realized she was looking at more than just architectural plans. She was seeing a blueprint for the life her father had intended to build for their family after his military service ended. The train car where she'd been living wasn't random. It was meant to be their temporary home, while the larger community took shape around them. What would it take to restart the project? Maya asked, surprised by her own boldness. Morrison smiled, clearly impressed by her directness. That's exactly the right question. Most of the original funding is still available, though some of the grants have time limits that would need to be extended. The major challenge is project management. Someone needs to oversee construction, coordinate with contractors, handle inspections and compliance issues. He paused, studying Maya thoughtfully. Your father planned to manage the project himself, drawing on his military logistics experience. Without him, we need to find someone with similar capabilities and the authority to make decisions on behalf of the property owner. Maya felt the weight of possibility and responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was looking at the chance to complete her father's work, but also at challenges that seemed almost impossibly complex for a 14-year-old to navigate. I've been working on the property for months, Maya said carefully. I've learned electrical work, plumbing, construction techniques. I understand the vision because I've been living it. That's obvious from the reports we've received, Morrison replied. The social workers were impressed by what you've accomplished, even if they were concerned about your living situation. But project management involves coordinating multiple contractors, managing budgets, dealing with city inspectors and zoning officials. It requires legal authority that minors simply don't have. Mrs. Chen, who had been listening quietly, leaned forward. What if Maya had adult partners? People with business experience who could handle the legal and financial aspects while she focused on the technical work? Morrison considered this suggestion. That could work, depending on the partnership structure. Maya would need legal guardians or trustees who could make binding decisions, but the project could definitely benefit from someone with her hands-on knowledge and commitment to the original vision. Over the following days, Maya found herself at the center of discussions that felt both exciting and overwhelming. Legal aid attorneys explained the options for establishing guardianship arrangements that would protect her interests while providing adult oversight. Community development specialists reviewed her father's plans and assessed the feasibility of updating them based on changes in technology and regulations over the past 2 years. Most importantly, Maya began meeting with potential adult partners who could help her manage the project's complexity. Mrs. Chen introduced her to Father Miguel Santos from the local Catholic Church, who had extensive experience with affordable housing development and strong connections to the construction trades. Walter, the security guard, who had first warned Maya about the rail yard's uncertain status, turned out to have a background in military logistics that made him invaluable for understanding her father's planning approach. Carlos proved unexpectedly helpful in recruiting support from younger community members. His enthusiasm for Maya's story and his natural social skills helped spread word about the project through neighborhood networks that official channels couldn't reach. Soon, Maya was meeting with teenagers who wanted to learn construction skills, parents who needed affordable housing, and retired professionals who were looking for meaningful volunteer opportunities. The momentum building around the project brought media attention that made Maya deeply uncomfortable. Newspaper reporters and local television crews wanted to tell the story of the homeless teenager who had inherited a development project, but Maya resisted efforts to turn her situation into a feel-good human interest story. "This isn't about me," she told one persistent journalist. "It's about creating housing that people can afford and communities where people take care of each other." My father understood that, and that's what we're trying to build. Maya's refusal to be portrayed as either a victim or a hero helped keep media coverage focused on the substantive aspects of the development project rather than sensationalizing her personal circumstances. This approach also attracted the attention of housing policy experts and urban planners who were genuinely interested in the innovative elements of her father's design. The legal proceedings to establish Maya's guardianship and project management structure were scheduled for late January. Maya spent the weeks leading up to the court date preparing testimony that would demonstrate her competence to participate meaningfully in major decisions about the property development. She created detailed presentations showing her electrical and plumbing installations, her garden planning and food production systems, and her documentation of material costs and labor requirements for various improvement projects. Most importantly, she prepared a comprehensive plan for completing her father's vision that incorporated everything she'd learned through months of practical experience. Maya also had to prepare for the possibility that the court might decide. She wasn't ready for the responsibilities involved in managing a major construction project. Alternative arrangements had been discussed that would place the property in a trust managed by adults, with Maya as a beneficiary rather than an active participant in decision-making. The night before the hearing, Maya sat in her train car reviewing her father's plans one final time. King lay beside her, calm and alert as always, providing the steady companionship that had sustained her through every challenge she'd faced. "Tomorrow we find out if I get to finish what you started, Dad," Maya wrote in her notebook. "I've learned so much about building things, about taking care of myself, about working with other people to solve problems. I think I'm ready for this, but I guess the judge will decide whether the law thinks a 14-year-old can handle something this big." She paused in her writing, looking around the space that had been transformed from an abandoned metal shell into a warm, functional home. Everything she'd accomplished had been building toward this moment, the chance to prove that young people could be partners in creating solutions to problems that affected their own lives and their communities. Maya closed the notebook and settled in for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would determine whether her months of survival, learning and building had been preparation for something larger or simply an impressive but temporary achievement that would be managed by adults while she returned to the conventional path of school and foster care. King's steady breathing and the familiar sounds of their home settling around them provided comfort as Maya drifted towards sleep and the day that would reshape her future. The Philadelphia family court building felt like a fortress as Maya walked up its stone steps on a cold January morning, flanked by Mrs. Chen on one side and Father Miguel on the other. King walked calmly beside her, his service dog vest and official documentation allowing him access to the courtroom where Maya's future would be decided. Maya wore her best clothes, a navy blue dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her select and black shoes that still felt strange after months of wearing only work boots. She carried a folder containing copies of her father's development plans, photographs of her train car transformation, and letters of support from community members who had witnessed her capabilities firsthand. The courtroom was more crowded than Maya had expected. In addition to the required legal representatives, dozens of people had come to support her case. Walter sat in the front row wearing his military dress uniform, his chest decorated with service ribbons that spoke to decades of honorable service. Dolores had brought her sons, Marcus and James, both dressed in their best clothes and clearly nervous about their first experience in a courtroom. Judge Patricia Hendricks was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of steady demeanor that immediately commanded respect. As she reviewed the case files, Maya noticed that the judge's questioning was thorough but not hostile. She seemed genuinely interested in understanding the unique circumstances that had brought them all together. "Maya," Judge Hendricks began, addressing her directly, I've read the reports about your living situation and the work you've accomplished on the property you've inherited. I'm impressed by your resourcefulness and determination. However, my primary concern is ensuring that any decisions made today serve your long-term best interests as a minor child. Maya stood when invited to address the court, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Your Honor, I understand that most 14-year-olds aren't ready for the kind of responsibility this project involves. But I've been living independently for months, learning skills that directly relate to the work my father planned to do, and building relationships with adults who can provide guidance and oversight. She gestured toward her supporters in the gallery. I'm not asking to do this alone. I'm asking to be part of a team that can complete what my father started, using knowledge I've gained through practical experience and with help from people who understand both the technical requirements and the community needs this project is designed to address. The judge listened carefully as Maya presented her case, referring to her notebook and the photographs that documented her transformation of the train car. Maya explained her electrical and plumbing systems, her food production methods, and her collaborative relationships with neighbors who had become informal mentors and partners. Most importantly, Your Honor, this project isn't just about housing. It's about proving that people who society often writes off, veterans, homeless families, teenagers aging out of foster care, can be partners in creating solutions that benefit entire communities. The opposing argument came from a city attorney, who argued that minor children, regardless of their capabilities, lacked the legal capacity to manage complex development projects involving federal funding and municipal oversight. He painted a picture of potential liability issues, financial mismanagement, and construction safety violations that could arise from allowing a teenager to participate in project management decisions. Maya's legal advocate, provided through the Legal Aid Society, countered by presenting the proposed guardianship structure that would give Maya meaningful input while ensuring adult supervision of major decisions. Father Miguel and Walter had both agreed to serve as co-trustees, providing complementary expertise in community development and logistics management. The question isn't whether Maya can handle these responsibilities alone, her attorney argued. The question is whether she can be an effective partner in a team that includes experienced adults who respect her insights and capabilities while providing appropriate oversight and guidance. Mrs. Chen was called as a character witness, and her testimony provided a different perspective on Maya's situation. She spoke about Maya's consistency, reliability, and willingness to learn from others, qualities that had been evident from their first meeting at the community garden. Maya is not a typical teenager, Mrs. Chen told the court. She has faced circumstances that required her to develop maturity and practical skills beyond her years. But more importantly, she has shown wisdom in seeking guidance from adults and building collaborative relationships rather than trying to handle everything independently. Walter's testimony focused on Maya's alignment with her father's vision and her practical understanding of the project's goals. Staff Sergeant Williams trained his daughter well, he told the judge. She has his strategic thinking, his attention to detail, and his commitment to serving others. This project was designed to help people who had been written off by society, and Maya embodies that mission. The most powerful testimony came from Marcus, Dolores' older son, who spoke about how Maya's example had inspired him to stay in school and develop practical skills. She showed me that being homeless doesn't mean being helpless, he told the court. She proved that young people can solve problems and build things that matter. As the hearing concluded, Judge Hendricks announced that she would take the matter under advisement and issue her decision within 1 week. The weight of uncertainty settled over Maya as she left the courtroom, knowing that everything she had worked toward hung in the balance of one person's judgment about whether a 14-year-old could be trusted with the responsibility of continuing her father's legacy. That evening, Maya sat in her train car processing the day's events and trying to prepare emotionally for either outcome. King seemed to sense her anxiety and stayed closer than usual, providing the steady companionship that had sustained her through every challenge. The gavel's final sound still echoed in Maya's memory, the sharp crack that had ended the hearing and begun the waiting period that would determine her future. The phone call came on a Thursday morning while Maya was working in her small garden, harvesting winter vegetables that had survived the previous night's frost. Mrs. Chen's voice carried barely contained excitement as she relayed the message from Maya's legal advocate. Judge Hendricks had reached her decision and wanted all parties to return to court that afternoon for the ruling. Maya spent the intervening hours in a state of controlled nervousness, unable to concentrate on any of her usual projects or routines. King seemed to pick up on her anxiety and stayed close, occasionally nudging her hand with his nose in the gesture of comfort that had become familiar during their months together. The same crowd that had attended the original hearing gathered in Judge Hendricks' courtroom, their faces reflecting the same mixture of hope and apprehension that Maya felt churning in her stomach. Mrs. Chen sat in her usual place in the front row, her presence providing the steady anchor that Maya had come to rely on during challenging moments. Judge Hendricks entered with the same composed demeanor she had displayed during the hearing, but Maya thought she detected something different in the judge's expression, a quality that might have been approval, though she tried not to read too much into subtle facial cues. "I have given considerable thought to this unusual case," Judge Hendricks began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "The law provides specific protections for minors, and those protections exist for good reasons. Children, regardless of their capabilities, lack the legal capacity to make certain kinds of decisions because society recognizes that some responsibilities require the judgment and authority that come with adulthood." Maya felt her heart sinking. As the judge's words seemed to be building toward a negative decision, she forced herself to maintain composure, remembering Mrs. Chen's advice about dignity and respect in all circumstances. "However," Judge Hendricks continued, "this case presents circumstances that require us to balance protection with recognition of demonstrated capability and the importance of honoring the intentions of a deceased parent who planned specifically for his child's future welfare." The judge paused, looking directly at Maya. "Maya Williams, you have shown remarkable maturity, resourcefulness, and judgment during a period of extraordinary difficulty. More importantly, you have demonstrated wisdom in seeking appropriate adult guidance and support, rather than attempting to handle complex responsibilities entirely on your own." Maya felt a flutter of hope, but tried to prepare herself for whatever conditions or restrictions might follow. "Therefore, I am granting your petition for emancipated minor status with the following conditions." Judge Hendricks lifted an official document from her desk. "You will remain under the supervisory guardianship of Father Miguel Santos and Walter Coleman, who will serve as co-trustees for the property development project. Major financial and legal decisions will require their approval, but you will have full participation in project planning and day-to-day management decisions." The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration, respectful applause, and whispered expressions of joy from Maya's supporters. Maya felt tears streaming down her face, though she wasn't sure whether they were from relief, happiness, or the overwhelming sense of responsibility that came with the judge's decision. "Furthermore," Judge Hendricks continued when the room had quieted, "I am approving the proposed development project as outlined in your father's plans, with the understanding that construction will proceed under proper oversight and in full compliance with all applicable regulations. The Veterans Administration has confirmed that the original funding remains available, and the City Planning Department has approved the updated construction permits." Maya could barely process what she was hearing. Not only had she won the right to participate in completing her father's work, but the judge had cleared the way for the project to move forward immediately. "Maya," Judge Hendricks addressed her directly one final time. "You are receiving an opportunity that few people your age would be trusted with. I'm confident that you understand the significance of this responsibility and that you will honor your father's memory through the quality of your work and your commitment to serving others who need safe, affordable housing." Maya stood, her voice steady despite her emotions. "Thank you, Your Honor. I won't disappoint you or let down the people who believed in me." As the legal formalities concluded, Maya found herself surrounded by the people who had supported her through the most challenging period of her life. Mrs. Chen embraced her with tears in her eyes. Walter and Father Miguel shook her hand with the kind of respect typically reserved for adult partners. Marcus and James grinned with the infectious excitement of young people who had witnessed something remarkable. The certificate of emancipation felt substantial in Maya's hands, not just as a legal document, but as tangible proof that society had recognized her as someone capable of making meaningful contributions to her community. It represented the end of her status as a runaway child and the beginning of her role as a housing developer and community leader. That evening, Maya sat in her train car, holding the certificate and trying to absorb the magnitude of what had changed in her life. King lay beside her, calm and alert as always, ready for whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. Maya opened her notebook and began writing, "Dear Mom and Dad, today the world officially recognized what you always believed, that young people can be partners in solving problems and creating positive change. Tomorrow we start building the community you dreamed of, using everything you taught me and everything I've learned since you've been gone." The scared 14-year-old who had first claimed this train car as shelter had become a legally recognized adult with the authority to complete one of the most ambitious, affordable housing projects in Philadelphia's recent history. 6 months after the court decision, Maya stood on the platform of her original train car, watching the sun set over what had become known throughout Philadelphia as Maya's Place, though the official name remained Veterans Village, as her father had intended. The abandoned rail yard had been transformed into a thriving community of 20 converted train cars, each providing safe, affordable housing for families who had previously struggled to find stable shelter. The bronze plaque, mounted beside her front door, caught the evening light, its simple inscription, "Maya's Place, Home Lover 1, serving as both tribute and reminder of the journey that had brought this community into existence. The plaque had been installed by residents of the development as a surprise for Maya's 15th birthday, recognizing her not just as the project's founder, but as its heart and inspiration. King, now officially registered as a therapy dog and community mascot, lay stretched out in his favorite spot on the platform, older and grayer, but still alert to the sounds and activities of their expanded neighborhood. Children played in the central courtyard, where Maya's original container garden had grown into a community food production system that supplied fresh vegetables year-round. The workshop, where Maya now taught electrical and plumbing skills to teenagers and adults, was housed in the renovated warehouse that had become the community center. 3 evenings a week, she worked with people who had never imagined they could learn to install solar panels or design rainwater collection systems. Marcus had become her assistant instructor, and together they had trained dozens of residents to maintain and improve their own homes. Mrs. Chen's influence was visible everywhere in the development's design and daily life. Her original community garden had been expanded and integrated into the overall landscape, providing not just food, but also gathering spaces where neighbors shared meals and celebrated milestones together. She had officially retired from her job at the corner store and now served as the community's unofficial grandmother and keeper of wisdom. Father Miguel's office in the community center had become a hub for connecting residents with educational opportunities, job training programs, and social services. Under his guidance, the development had achieved something remarkable. Nearly every adult resident was employed or enrolled in education programs, and every child was attending school regularly and performing at or above grade level. Maya's own educational path had been unconventional but thorough. She was completing her high school requirements through a combination of online courses and dual enrollment at the local community college, where she was studying urban planning and sustainable development. Her practical experience managing the Veterans Village project had earned her early admission to several prestigious university programs, though she planned to remain closely connected to the community regardless of where her formal education took her. The project's success had attracted attention from housing policy experts and urban planners across the country. Maya had been invited to speak at conferences and had consulted on similar projects in other cities, always emphasizing that the key to successful affordable housing was treating residents as partners rather than beneficiaries. People don't just need houses, Maya had told a gathering of city officials and non-profit leaders the previous month. They need communities where they can contribute their skills, where their children can grow up safely, and where they have real ownership in the decisions that affect their lives. The economic model of Veterans Village had proven as innovative as its design. Residents paid affordable rent that covered basic utilities and maintenance, but they also contributed labor hours to community projects and shared responsibility for common areas. This approach had created not just housing stability, but genuine community ownership and pride. Maya's evening routine had evolved to include walking through the development, checking on various projects, and visiting with neighbors who had become extended family. Tonight, she stopped by Dolores's train car, where the former seamstress now ran a small tailoring business from a workshop that doubled as her living room. Marcus and James had their own train car next door, shared living space that allowed them privacy while keeping the family close together. "Maya, come in for tea," Dolores called through her open window. "Mrs. Chen brought by some of those honey cakes you like." Maya settled into the comfortable chair that had become her spot in Dolores's workshop, accepting the cup of tea and small cake that represented the kind of informal family connection she had mourned since her parents' death. These evening visits had become precious to her, moments of quiet connection that balanced the increasingly public aspects of her role as the development's leader and spokesperson. "Any word from the university about your acceptance?" Dolores asked, settling into her own chair with her tea. "The letters should come next week," Maya replied. "But honestly, I'm not sure I want to go away for 4 years. There's still so much work to do here, and I don't want to leave when the community is still growing and changing." Dolores smiled with the wisdom of someone who had navigated difficult transitions herself. "The community will be here when you get back, and what you learn in college will make you even better at helping people build the kinds of lives they want." As Maya walked back to her own train car later that evening, she reflected on how much her understanding of home had expanded over the past 2 years. The scared 14-year-old who had first claimed this rusty train car as shelter had been focused entirely on personal survival. The young woman she had become understood that true security came from building communities where everyone had a stake in each other's success. King was waiting on their platform when Maya returned, his tail wagging with the enthusiasm he reserved for the end of each day when their work was done and they could settle into the quiet routines that still anchored their life together. Maya sat beside him, scratching behind his ears while looking out over the lights of the community that had grown around their original sanctuary. She opened her notebook, the same composition book where she had first sketched plans for renovating the train car, and wrote, "Dear Mom and Dad, today marks 2 years since I first found this place. What started as desperate search for shelter has become something I know you would be proud of. We've built more than houses here. We've built proof that people can create the changes they want to see in their communities when they have the courage to start building." Maya closed the notebook and settled back against King's warm side, listening to the familiar sounds of their neighborhood settling into evening. children being called in for baths, adults finishing up projects and conversations, the distant hum of the city beyond their peaceful enclave. The train car that had once been her entire world was now just one part of a larger community, but it remained the place where she felt most connected to her parents' memory and most clear about her own purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to expand the model they had created here, and new chances to prove that home truly was something you built rather than something you found. But tonight, Maya Williams was exactly where she belonged, in the community that had grown from her determination to transform a piece of forgotten urban landscape into something that honored both her father's vision and her own hard-earned understanding of what it meant to create a place where everyone could thrive.